Hello, my name's Peter John Cooper. Welcome to Blood and Bones, my musing on what it's like to be a playwright in the 21st century. I've spent 40 years sitting in bars and cafes trying to understand how people talk to each other. Today, episode 12, I'm talking about dialogue.
Suppose I'd better get you a coffee. Yes?
Yeah, what you...
Come on. Cappuccino.
Yeah, no. You know, last week.
Yes, such a...
What?
Oh,
Yeah, Americano then. Hot milk, sir. Um, black then.
no milk.
Yeah, cheers. One cappuccino, one Americano, black. That's £5.60. I'll bring them over. I'll bring them over. I should have asked for a cappuccino.
Whatever.
I'd like to make it quite clear that is an attempt to record an actual conversation, not how I'd present it for a script. I certainly wouldn't include all the gestures and so on. I'd write the dialogue and then leave it to the actors to find all the unwritten stuff, deducing it from their own interpretation of the character and what they find works. But my general point is that as a playwright, well, as any sort of writer, you should start by listening to people talking as much and as often as possible, or so I said to my young friend Skidmore as he was complaining about his latest 500-word exercise that he'd been given for his part-time course at the uni. The cafe or the bus is an ideal place to do it. Listen closely and at some length to other people's conversations as you sip your cappuccino. Blow the dust off your notebook and write down what they say. Most important, the way they say it. When I started out as a playwright, I couldn't do dialogue. I worked with a co-writer and I did the situations and funny bits and he wrote the dialogue. My attempts to do dialogue sounded stilted and unrealistic. Well, anybody can write a play that depends on situation or plot, but to write a play that depends on character requires an understanding of how to build that character and how that character develops within and around a plot. And how that character develops is conveyed by what that character says and does. In other words, how they speak. So I spent years drinking coffee trying to acquire this skill, and I'm still baffled by the complexities of conversation. There seem to be no rules, or rather the rules are not instantly discernible. But I'll keep drinking Americanos and trying to understand what I'm working for. Nobody should embark on the dangerous path of playwriting until they have spent at least 6 months drinking coffee in a busy cafe, preferably one you have to catch a bus to get to. Conversational speech is broken halting, discursive, unsettled, entirely without grammar or syntax as described in the conventional manuals. Sentences have no verbs. They do not link one to another. They are made up partly of words, partly of sounds, and partly of gestures. One of the problems we have is that we've been firmly schooled in the art of cinema. Here dialogue is terse and to the point, and as little as possible. In real life, we tend to overspeak. We repeat the same point over and over again. We do not listen to the person we are speaking at, and we wander off into unrelated byways at the drop of a hat. By following the rules of filmmaking on stage, we lose much of this richness and layering of normal human interaction that is so needed in a piece for the stage. We can lose the poetry of real speech. I've tried to explain all this in part 11 about the makeup of language itself. The language we use can only obliquely refer to the subjects we feel we want to discuss. Thus, dialogues have very little logic. Yet it's quite possible for one person to espouse several quite contradictory ideas at one time. Sometimes our interlocutors speak in other voices. Or the actual meaning of irony, by the way. Most of the time, the conversation does not follow the neat ordered pattern of question response we would expect as writers. Most of the time, people will only talk about themselves, each question or statement being answered or interrupted by their own experience. Yet, somehow, in this mishmash of half-formed sentences and ill-formed ideas, some sort of exchange does take place. It may be indirect, convoluted, metaphorical, but eventually some idea may be conveyed to the other party. Well, let us recall Professor Pinker's idea from my previous episode that language is a form of grooming. It's a way to synchronize our feelings with others so that it is the very act of conversation that conveys meaning rather than the words used or what is said. So what do we playwrights learn from this? Well, firstly, that our characters need to be freed from the conventions of literary written speech. This gives us the opportunities to learn about the reality of our characters. Our character can grow with our discovery of their little tics and irregularities. And I don't mean that gives us license to write in some sort of ridiculous Van Dyke Cockney voice. I mean that we can discover the outward signs of the inward workings of a character through their speech. And as we write it, we need to speak it out loud. We are trying to record a spoken interchange, so it only exists in some bare notation as words on a page. In writing dialogue, it is perhaps useful to think of the words on the page as a sort of code that reveals your intentions for the characters. Secondly, we need to remember that most conversations are about anything but the subject in hand. This is especially true about complex and deep subjects. Previously, I mentioned our inbuilt willingness to suspend our disbelief. If you ally that with our need to cooperate and collaborate in social situations, you can begin to see how inevitable it is that we will say things in a conversation that we may not believe. in an attempt to maintain the interaction. It takes quite a lot of beating about the bush before the real feelings of our characters are flushed out. Well, this is what makes the process of play watching so enjoyable. The audience are voyeurs trying to understand something from the snippets of half-formed conversation they are allowed to overhear. And of course, our characters are often unreliable witnesses. They lie, they prevaricate, they say the very opposite of what they really think and feel. I'll tackle this in the next episode about internal dialogue, but as the watchers begin to know and understand, they begin to get more and more drawn in and engaged. We create an empathy, if not an understanding. Thirdly, on a practical level, I think it's wise to avoid using stage directions if at all possible. If you've got the voice and the tone of the exchange right, then there is no need to interject humorously or bitterly. It must be there in the speech itself. I usually think that if I've had to resort to stage directions, then I need to recast the speech. I try to do the actor who is cooperating with my words the courtesy of being able to bring their knowledge and expertise to bear. Similarly, as a director, I get annoyed by writers who write detailed character descriptions of the stage directions, but do not carry them through into their actual speech and actions. It's not good enough to describe a character as young, dynamic, and ambitious. You need to show those attributes. You need to demonstrate how that ambition is manifested or hidden through what they say and the choices they make in conversation. Yet somehow the playwright needs to convey some sort of meaning to an audience. A playwright does not necessarily want to reproduce everyday speech exactly as I've been mentioning before. It would be massively tedious to the audience and probably totally incomprehensible. But for me, there is an inbuilt urge towards getting closer than I have managed up to now. As I've mentioned before, we need to convey an impression of verisimilitude rather than precise actuality. In the end, every writer will have to arrive at his or her own method of notating speech in a realistic, believable way while maintaining an engaging, controlled style. Well, we only have to think of writers like Pinter, who arguably came closest to making this work. He still had to resort to a rather mannered, as we say, Pinteresque approach. Well, thanks for watching. Please like and share and press the subscribe button below. Next episode, number 13, I'll try and wrestle with the conversation that goes beyond conversation, the inner dialogue. Thanks for watching.